our family's financial problems. I was the opposite. I wanted to pick at it, study it, try to understand it, and do everything I could to make sure it never happened to my family again. I spent years studying and listening to working families like mine. And I discovered a disturbing trend. More and more families were going bankrupt. Families like mine were falling further and further behind. And the crisis was hitting families of color even harder. And it was because Washington was listening more and more to big corporations. I started ringing alarm bells.
The idea that we have a strong economy is just false.
And then,
now it's official, we are in a recession.
That's when I left the classroom and got in the fight.
Somebody has got to stand up on behalf of middle-class families.
Elizabeth Warren is heading into the lion's den.
She's become perhaps the leading voice in our country on behalf of consumers.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable. And when Republicans tried to sabotage reform, I ran against one of them, and I beat him. This election is about power. Who has too much of it and who needs more of it? My daddy was a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, a senator, and a candidate for president of the United States. I have lived opportunity, and I believe that no matter where you live in America and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity. We can take on the rich and powerful to make our government work for all of us. And I'm not afraid to fight for it. That's why I'm running for president. It was right here that I think I broke my nose for the first time. We were playing a really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted.
You persisted.
This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back.
Hello? Hey, brother!
How you doing?
After my brothers went off to the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack. My mom took a minimum wage job to save our house. Now, my parents didn't like to talk about our family's financial problems. I was the opposite. I wanted to pick at it, study it, try to understand it, and do everything I could to make sure it never happened to my family again. I spent years studying and listening to working families like mine. And I discovered a disturbing trend. More and more families were going bankrupt. Families like mine were falling further and further behind. And the crisis was hitting families of color even harder. And it was because Washington was listening more and more to big corporations. I started ringing alarm bells.
The idea that we have a strong economy is just false.
And then,
now it's official, we are in a recession.
that's when I left the classroom and got in the fight.
Somebody has got to stand up on behalf of middle-class families.
Elizabeth Warren is heading into the lion's den.
She's become perhaps the leading voice in our country on behalf of consumers.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable. And when Republicans tried to sabotage reform, I ran against one of them, and I beat him. This election is about power. Who has too much of it and who needs more of it? My daddy was a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, a senator, and a candidate for president of the United States. I have lived opportunity. And I believe that no matter where you live in America and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity. We can take on the rich and powerful to make our government work for all of us. And I'm not afraid to fight for it. That's why I'm running for president. It was right here that I think I broke my nose for the first time. We were playing a really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted.
You persisted.
This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back.
Hello? Hey, brother!
How you doing?
After my brothers went off to the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack. My mom took a minimum wage job to save our house. Now, my parents didn't like to talk about our family's financial problems. I was the opposite. I wanted to pick at it, study it, try to understand it, and do everything I could to make sure it never happened to my family again. I spent years studying and listening to working families like mine. And I discovered a disturbing trend. More and more families were going bankrupt. Families like mine were falling further and further behind. And the crisis was hitting families of color even harder. And it was because Washington was listening more and more to big corporations. I started ringing alarm bells.
The idea that we have a strong economy is just false.
And then
Now it's official, we are in a recession.
that's when I left the classroom and got in the fight.
Somebody has got to stand up on behalf of middle-class families.
Elizabeth Warren
is heading into the lion's den.
She's become perhaps the leading voice in our country on behalf of consumers.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable. And when Republicans tried to sabotage reform, I ran against one of them, and I beat him. This election is about power. Who has too much of it, and who needs more of it? My daddy was a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, a senator, and a candidate for President of the United States. I have lived opportunity. And I believe that no matter where you live in America and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity. We can take on the rich and powerful to make our government work for all of us. And I'm not afraid to fight for it. That's why I'm running for president. It was right here that I think I broke my nose for the first time. We were playing a really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted. This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back.
Hello? Hey, brother?
How you doing?
After my brothers went off to the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack. My mom took a minimum wage job to save our house. Now, my parents didn't like to talk about our family's financial problems. I was the opposite. I wanted to pick at it, study it, try to understand it, and do everything I could to make sure it never happened to my family again. I spent years studying and listening to working families like mine. And I discovered a disturbing trend. More and more families were going bankrupt. Families like mine were falling further and further behind. And the crisis was hitting families of color even harder. And it was because Washington was listening more and more to big corporations. I started ringing alarm bells.
The idea that we have a strong economy is just false.
And then
Now it's official, we are in a recession.
that's when I left the classroom and got in the fight.
Somebody has got to stand up on behalf of middle-class families.
Elizabeth Warren
is heading into the lion's den.
She's become perhaps the leading voice in our country on behalf of consumers.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable. And when Republicans tried to sabotage reform, I ran against one of them, and I beat him. This election is about power. Who has too much of it, and who needs more of it? My daddy was a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, a senator, and a candidate for President of the United States. I have lived opportunity. And I believe that no matter where you live in America and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity. We can take on the rich and powerful to make our government work for all of us. And I'm not afraid to fight for it. That's why I'm running for president. It was right here that I think I broke my nose for the first time. We were playing a really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted. This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back.
Hello? Hey, brother?
Tonight because our union has gone through a very big process of engagement in this, the most important election in our lifetime. And we have decided, after lots and lots and lots of talking to people and everything else, that there are actually 3 candidates that we love as a union: Bernie, Joe, and Elizabeth. And that each of us in this next 2 months could do whatever we wanted and thought was important for any of these candidates. And I want to say tonight, Joe Biden won decisively in South Carolina. I want to congratulate him for that. But, yes, let's congratulate him for that. Because at the end of the day, we will all unify in a way to defeat Donald Trump. But for me personally, my union allows me to do this. If I think about a candidate who can not only defeat Donald Trump, but who could create the direction that we need in America, that is Elizabeth Warren. And that's why I am here in my personal capacity. Like 1.7 million of our members, we are encouraging to do that in their personal capacity. That is why I am here on this stage talking about the person I will vote for in the New York primary, and that is Elizabeth Warren. So let me tell you a little bit of why. She has the life experiences that brings an understanding of what families need to have a better life. She has a bold agenda to accomplish that. And she has the wherewithal to work with others to turn these ideas into a reality. That is what we need in a president. And of course, just think about it. Just think for a moment. Wouldn't you love to watch Elizabeth take on Donald Trump on the debate stage? Wouldn't you love to see that toughness and persistence taking on those lies and demagoguery? Frankly, I can't imagine that Donald would actually debate Elizabeth. But let me also say this. As someone who's been fighting for public education for 40 years, I often say since the dinosaurs roamed, and as somebody who's been a public school teacher and fights to make sure every public school is a place that parents want to send their kids, educators want to work, and kids thrive, wouldn't it be great to have a teacher in the White House? Because being a teacher means being fearless and flexible, loving and compassionate, hardworking and resilient, dedicated and devoted to making life better for kids and their families. Being a teacher, yeah, teachers rock. And so do families. Being a teacher means having an innate understanding of the value of public education and what is needed to help all children succeed. And frankly, Elizabeth has infused these qualities and these experiences into her candidacy. Yes, she is smart, and yes, she is fearless. Yes, she has a plan, and a plan, and a plan to invest in public education, to invest in childcare, to invest in infrastructure, to invest in healthcare, to unrig the economy so it works for working people with a specific focus on communities of color, to make sure our children inherit a healthier earth. But she's also shown in her career the ability to get these things done. Think about what happened with the Consumer Financial Review Board. Think about what what she was able to do. $12.4 billion of relief to 31 million Americans. Think about what would happen if she was in charge of the whole economy. But I want to dwell for a couple more minutes just on education. How many times, you're in Texas, how many times are you told, do more with less? How many times have we had to compete with the privatizers and the monetizers who want to take public schools away instead of giving our kids the kind of supports and services they need, the kind of supports like nurses and therapists? How many times have we had to fight in terms of special needs kids to get them the IDEA funding? Or kids who are poor to get them smaller class sizes? Well, here you have a candidate who has said, we will quadruple. That means 4 times as much. I'm not a math teacher, I'm a social studies teacher. But quadruple Title I and make sure that the promises of IDEA that were made years ago actually happen for our special needs kids. And in a moment in time when half our kids come to school with trauma, and that's before the coronavirus, in a moment of time of that, Elizabeth Warren has said, let's have 25,000 community schools and wrap services around schools and make schools the center of communities once again. Teaching, not testing. Children, not data. So for me, after 40 years of fighting this, I want a president who will actually make the promise and the potential of public education as foundational to our democracy and as the great equalizer it ought to be. I want a president who's able to accomplish that, not only with their plans, but with their boldness, their smartness, and their compassion. So, whether it's economic issues, whether it's the fact that somebody understands that you need a union to make sure that there's a living wage, that you need public education to make sure we help all kids, that we need health care as a right, not a privilege, whatever it is, just imagine having Elizabeth Warren there. I'll raise one more issue. Take student debt. $1.6 trillion of student debt. How dare we do this to the next generation? And isn't it good to have a presidential candidate who has said, I will take on the banks, I will take on the student loaners, I will do what we can to put students first. Enough with Betsy DeVos. Enough with the privatizer. Enough with the person who wants the student lenders to be on top, not the borrowers. So look, for all of these reasons, for the fact that Elizabeth believes in the dignity and the worth of every human, for the fact that she doesn't pit people against each other, she doesn't blame the others, she confronts bigotry. She believes that we are the best when we live up to our ideals of justice for all and the nation's motto, out of many one. Whatever the issue is, housing, education, jobs, childcare, climate, corruption, democracy, you can count on Elizabeth to not only be fierce, to not only be persistent, to not only be a fighter, but to be a healer, to bring people together. So let me end with this. Do we want hope or do we want fear? Do we want compassion or do we want cruelty? Do we want fairness or do we want inequity? Well, if we want hope and if we want compassion, and if we want fairness, and if we want to see America's better days in the future, not behind us, then there is one candidate who can do that, and that is Elizabeth Warren. Thank you very much.
Be a Harris County Democrat, isn't it? In 2018, you voted, you mobilized, you organized, and we showed that the largest county in Texas, the size of 26 states in population, is firmly blue. And now it's time to pull our weight and make sure we get the right person in the White House. First, let me say thank you. You helped me get elected. But it was women like Elizabeth Warren who inspired me to run in the first place. With an eye on trailblazers like her, thousands of women across the country stood up and took matters into our own hands. We ran, we fought, and we won. And because of that, our government looks a little bit more like the rest of us. And today, February 2020, I stand before you as Harris County Judge. For anyone that missed the memo, it's not a judicial position. I help control the budget for the county. So make sure that the $5 billion that is your county budget actually reflects your values and your priorities. And that's today. But in February 2018, I was a candidate. And I was calling everyone I'd ever met, asking them for a campaign contribution, and trying to build a campaign team, and trying to convince the powers that be that it was possible to win countywide in 2018. And in the middle of all of that, I received a letter from a senator. It was Senator Elizabeth Warren sending me a letter, hand signed, basically saying, you can do it, keep going. When I hadn't even won the Democratic nomination at that point, and when so many people wrote me off and wouldn't even give me the time of day, a senator from all the way in Massachusetts had my back. And she was there because she recognized that in order to create real change, we need to change the face of power at all levels of government. You know how people say you had me at hello? Elizabeth Warren had me at big structural change.
Dude, you're popping
She wasn't planning on being a politician either. She was fighting for change, and at some point that took her to government. She took on the big banks, and she won. And when the Republicans started getting in her way, she ran for Senate, and she won. And now she's running for president, and we need her there. I need her there. We've been fighting hard in Harris County for the last year because in Harris County, we believe in big structural change. Is that right? In a county where people weren't allowed to utter the words climate change. Now, after 500-year floods, you bet we're taking it on. Where we were locking up people just because they were poor. We're implementing right now bail reform in the heart of Texas and taking on the bail bondsman. In a county where 18% of our children have at least one parent who is undocumented and live in fear every day, we are building a legal defense fund for immigrants. We're fighting the fear-mongering because diversity is our strength, and we will not let it be used against us. And that's Elizabeth Warren. That's why we need her in office. We're doing so much without help from the White House. We're taking on gun violence. We're taking on access to the ballot box. We're working on investing in our children and even wonky things like making sure the budget actually makes sense and is allocated with metrics and goals, and we know what's in it. If we had an ally in the White House, we could do so much more, and that's why I'm standing here today. And so 2 years ago, I dreamt that I could be here, and you guys helped make it happen. And now I'm asking you to help dream with me, to imagine the day that big leather chair is rolled out of the White House, and Elizabeth Warren sits in her chair and signs a bill to move our country forward, not backwards. The day a President Elizabeth Warren gets to work. So now let's all get to work for her, because we can do this. The polls are there for it. She needs us, and it is our turn to make sure she gets there. Let's fight for her. Let's fight for big structural change. Let's make this happen. Help me give the biggest welcome to my inspiration and our next president, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Houston! So, results from South Carolina are coming in, and I want to say congratulations to Vice President Biden. I will be the first to say that the first 4 contests haven't gone exactly as I'd hoped. If you want to change the outcome in the next contest, go to ElizabethWarren.com, chip in now, get involved. Super Tuesday's 3 days away. We want to gain as many delegates to the convention as we can, from California to right here in Texas. You know, it may take days or even longer to know the full results from Super Tuesday, but they will be critical in sorting out who our nominee will be this year. My campaign is built for the long haul, and we are looking forward to these big contests. So I want to thank you. I want to start by thanking Judge Lina Hidalgo. She is amazing, the face of Houston, the future of Texas. Boy, a woman leader for America. So thank you, Lina. I also want to say a very, very special thank you to Randi, Weingarten, and all the teachers who are here tonight. And a special thank you to United We Dream. This is how we build a Democratic Party that wins. We do it by all coming together here. So thank you all. And thank you for welcoming me back to Texas. You know, I did some real growing up here. I finished college at the University of Houston. Go Cougs! Had my first job as a law professor at U of H and then at UT. Go Longhorns! Now, usually I begin my events by talking about how we've become a country that works better and better for those at the top and worse for everyone else. I love to talk about plans for making this country work for everyone. I got a plan for that. But tonight, with your permission, I'd really like to use our time together a little differently. I'd like to skip the usual stories and instead first talk about a crisis that is upon us. And then I know some of you came here to hear about other policies, so we'll take some minutes near the end to talk about things like immigration reform and climate and the all-important, then we will cut to the all-important selfie line. So we'll get this done. The crisis that is upon us now. For nearly a year, I have expressed concern about the weakness in our economy. I've called attention to a manufacturing sector that is tumbling into recession. Talked about debt loads that were unsustainable. Discussed an economy. Okay, we're good. I want to talk about a serious problem facing our country right now. About debt loads that are unsustainable, about an economy that is dependent on household and corporate borrowing instead of rapidly rising wages. The data make it clear. Our economic foundation is shaky, and a number of smaller shocks or one big shock could cause this economy to crumble. But despite these warnings, the Trump administration failed to act. And now that shock has arrived. The coronavirus is spreading worldwide and here in the United States. The stock market had its worst week since the crash of 2008. The impact on our families, particularly on babies and elderly people and people with other health challenges, could be severe. And the impact on our economy could also be brutal, putting jobs at risk, threatening savings, undermining economic stability, and even potentially destabilizing our giant, globally interconnected banks. The time to start preparing for this health crisis was years ago. And the time to prepare for the coronavirus specifically was months ago. We can't go back, but we also can't afford to waste any more time. This is a time for honest leadership that respects science, that draws on serious experts, and that delivers real results. This is both a public health crisis and a potential economic crisis, not just here in the United States, but worldwide. So in the coming days, I will be releasing an expanded plan to deal with the public health and economic effects of the coronavirus. These are steps that Congress and the President should take immediately to keep our people and our economy healthy. Here are some of the elements. First, every American, whether they have insurance or not, should be able to get recommended coronavirus testing and receive any future recommended vaccine for free. Second, no one should face thousands of dollars in medical bills and lost wages if they're put in mandatory quarantine by the government. It's not only the moral thing to do, it keeps us all safer. And third, anyone exhibiting symptoms should get fully paid time off and see a doctor, get tested and treated for the virus. No one who's sick should feel like they have to go to work and potentially spread this virus faster just because they can't afford to miss a few days' pay. And fourth, we should pass a major targeted physical stimulus to counteract the economic harm that the coronavirus is about to cause. Our financial response should include providing direct support to businesses of all sizes that have seen their supply chains disrupted by manufacturing slowdowns across Asia. I'm also calling right now, tonight, for the Federal Reserve to take action to help out American companies. During the financial crisis, the Fed quietly gave big banks access to trillions of dollars in low-cost loans to prop them up. The Fed should stand ready to offer low-cost loans to companies that agree to support their workers and that need a little help to make it through the next few months. It's important that these companies do not lay people off or go under because of a short-term disruption in their supply chains. Look, those are concrete steps that we can take right now. But this moment is a reminder of what qualities we need in a president and what qualities are sorely lacking in the one we have. Ultimately, that's what this election is all about. With fears of an economic crisis and recession rising, with fears of a global pandemic rising, Americans must ask themselves, who do you actually trust to run this government? Donald Trump has already shown he is not up to the task. So let's talk about who Democrats should nominate. Now, I'm going to be blunt here. This crisis demands more than a billionaire mayor who believes that since he's rich enough to buy network airtime to pretend he's the president, that entitles him to be the president. A mayor whose track record has shown that he'll govern to protect himself and his rich friends over everyone else. That's a no. This crisis demands more than a former vice president who is so eager to cut deals with Mitch McConnell and the Republicans that he'll trade good ideas for bad ones. And this crisis demands more than a senator who has good ideas but whose 30-year track record shows he consistently calls for things that fail to get done and consistently opposing things that nevertheless he fails to stop. I've said many times, and I believe, that any of the Democrats running would be a better president than Donald Trump. Can I have an amen on that? And that is still true. But this crisis is a reminder that this primary isn't a game. We are picking a president, and we need someone whose core values can be trusted, who has a plan for how to govern, and who can actually get it done. I I will be that president. So, I've been at the center of this kind of crisis before. My preparation started actually right here, teaching law at the University of Houston and then at U of T. Now, I love teaching. I knew it was what I was meant to do. I taught the money courses, contracts, bankruptcy, secured transactions, finance, and and assumption. Who knows what assumption means? Good, we'll do this. But in my teaching and in my research, I was always studying one simple question. Why are so many American families going broke? Here in Texas, I first dug into the data to figure out what drove families into bankruptcy. And with my fellow researchers, I went around to courthouses all over the country, copying thousands of bankruptcy filings to begin understanding why so many American families turned to bankruptcy. And at every turn, I saw a government that had been captured by wealthy people and powerful corporations. I saw the people in power, regulators and Congress, happy to do the bidding of big banks and Wall Street, but ignoring the signs of a coming crisis. A crisis that would ultimately cost millions of Americans their homes, their jobs, and their savings. In the early 2000s, when I saw the early signs of what became the 2008 financial crisis, I rang the alarm bells as loud as I could. Yes, I did. In 2003, I called out subprime lenders for tricking unsuspecting families, especially Black families and Latino families. Tricked them into refinancing into overpriced subprime mortgages. In 2005, I warned that families were getting deeper and deeper into debt and hanging on only by borrowing against their homes. I explained that these families were walking a financial tightrope, which even the slightest breeze would send them head over heels into financial chaos. By 2006, I flagged that foreclosure rates were climbing, but that mortgage lenders were still churning out loans because they had passed on the risks of default to distant investors in the form of mortgage-backed securities. Now, those trends, shady subprime lending, rising household debt, a mortgage market where lenders didn't bear the risk of their loans, set the stage for the 2008 crisis. And yeah, I rang the alarm bells as loudly as I could, but the people with the power to stop the crisis didn't listen. Not enough of them anyway. Not the banks, not Alan Greenspan, not other federal regulators, not Congress. And when that crisis hit in 2008, working families lost it all, while the big banks that broke the economy got a fat taxpayer bailout. It was wrong. So when the crisis came, Congress came to me and asked me to head up the Congressional Oversight Panel to try to get some accountability on how that bank bailout was working. And as the crisis unfolded and Congress began drafting reforms for the financial sector, I saw my chance. We could end this corrupt system that worked great for the banks and kick dirt on the families. So I pushed hard to get my idea for a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau passed into law. Now, people told me, don't even try. The idea is too big, it would be too hard. But we built a coalition and we mobilized people all across this country to push the politicians to stand with the consumers instead of the banks. The banks fought back. They were spending more than $1 million a day of lobbyist money to flood the halls of Congress. But we fought harder and we won. And then President Obama asked me to come to Washington and set it up. So I built the agency from about 2 employees to about 1,000 employees, got it operational, made it all work,
and really put in place the kinds of safeguards we need to keep banks from boosting their profits by cheating people. Now, I love that agency. I love how it showed we could make government work, not just for the rich and powerful, we could make government work for everyone. And when Republican senators blocked me from running the agency permanently, I went back to Massachusetts. I ran for office against one of those incumbent Republican senators, and I beat him. And just a little side point, I became the first female senator from the state. And the reason I talk about this story is this campaign for president has reminded me a lot of my time traveling and meeting families that were going through bankruptcy. The stories of why American families are struggling today have the same root causes. It's a 1-2 punch of government corruption and corporate greed. During the course of this campaign, I've introduced about a gazillion detailed plans that are all really just one plan, and that is how we transform a corrupt government and a rigged economy that only benefits those at the top into a government and an economy that builds opportunity for every single person. Everything I plan to do as president flows from that. And that is why I am in this race. And that is why I am asking for your vote. If you think we need both progressive ideas and progressive results, then go to ElizabethWarren.com, pitch in $5, sign up to volunteer, and join us. Because the time to choose is upon us. The crises we face are real. 2020 is your chance to choose a president, and I'm ready to get to work. So I just want to say to all of you how grateful I am that you are here tonight. I think of this as an opportunity where we get a chance to talk about plans, but more than anything else, we get a chance to come together and talk about our values. So let me just mention a couple that I just think are critical. I think they're a part of who we are and how we build a future. The first one is, let's just all say it. Immigration does not make our country weaker. Immigration makes our country stronger. And I got a plan for that. No great nation separates children from their families. No great nation tears families apart. I am sick of an America where we talk about mixed status. We need a pathway to citizenship for all of our friends who are here to stay. This is what we will do. And there's a lot. Look, I will be in this fight to create that pathway to citizenship, but that one goes through Congress. I want to be clear. There's a lot a president can do, I love saying this, all by herself. Close all for-profit detention centers and private prisons in this country. And I will treat people who come here seeking asylum with the respect and humanity that all human beings deserve. The world watches us, and they watch what we do on our southern border. They watch what we do when we round up people in our cities. They watch what we do. I promise you this. As President of the United States, I will lead this country and I will make you proud every day. I can't leave here without also talking about one other issue. I got to do a couple here while I'm here. And that is, we have a gun violence problem in America. And here's how I think of this problem. It's the mass shootings. Oh, Lord. You all have lived through these. We lived through them out in El Paso, lived through them around the country. Children who now do active shooter drills. It's a terrible, terrible burden on our country, but it is not the only part of gun violence. Children die, young people die every day on our street corners, on sidewalks, on playgrounds. Hardest hit are communities of color. They don't make headlines, but they are deaths of the people we love. It is an important part of gun violence. The lethality of suicides is also a part of the gun violence we suffer every single day, and we have to call it out. And domestic violence. The odds that a woman, and it's usually a woman, who will die if she is in the same house with an abuser and a gun. We have to treat gun violence as the public health emergency that it is. We have to be willing to take sensible steps like uniform background checks, get weapons of war off the street. But we can't just be one thing or two things and done. This is a problem we've got to be willing to go back to and back to and back to. And here's the heart of what we have to understand. Gun violence in America, immigration, changes we want to make. Right now, why can't we make them? Think about it this way. More than 90% of Americans want to see us do uniform background checks and get weapons of war off our streets, and we can't get a vote in Mitch McConnell's Senate. Well, let me tell you what I'm running for. I'm running against the corruption in Washington that leaves the NRA and the gun industry in charge. We want to make change. We have to fight back against that corruption and make this government work for the people. One more that we have to spend a minute on, and that is climate change. I'm going to say something that is very controversial in Washington with your own senator. Very controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. I believe in science. What scares me the most right now is every time the scientists go back and they take another look, they get more data, they put it into their models, the problem is worse than we thought, and we have less time than we thought. So this is the urgent moment. And this isn't your plan versus my plan. Boy, this is all the plans. We got to get them out there, and we got to get them on the table. So here's my proposal. I want to do a 10-fold increase in science, in research, in development. We got to innovate our way out of this. We've got an upcoming $27 trillion worldwide market for green energy, cleaning carbon out of the air and water, desalination of water. So here's the plan. We'll invent it. Anybody can build it, but you got to build it right here in the United States of America and produce jobs for Americans. We also can't talk about climate without talking about climate justice. For decades and decades and decades now, our federal government, our state government, and our local governments have permitted polluting factories and toxic waste dumps to be located in or near communities of color. It has harmed the health of little children. It has harmed the health of seniors. It has harmed the health of people who have otherwise have medical problems. It also has harmed those communities financially. Who wants to move to a place where the air smells bad, where you can't drink the water? So part of my climate commitment is we have to acknowledge what we have done as a country And I will commit to spend $1 trillion to clean up that mess. That's what we got to do. One more I'll mention on this. There's so much to do on it, but one more I'll mention. I'm for a Green New Deal, but that's not enough. We got to have a Blue New Deal as well. Protect our oceans. You know I could do these all night long. But I will say just one more. You want to build a future? Invest in our children. I believe in public education. I believe in public education, and here's the thing. I've got a 2-cent wealth tax. I've got an $800 billion investment in K-12, an investment in early childhood, an investment in post-high school, technical school, 2-year college, 4-year college, cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans. But there's more. There's so much that a president can do just with the Department of Education. So I want to tell you about my plan. You know, at night before I go to bed, I think about the things I could do. And one of them I think about is Secretary of Education who's been a public school teacher. Secretary of Education who believes in public education. Secretary of Education who believes public dollars stay in public schools. Oh, and one more. Secretary of Education who's ready to throw high-stakes testing into the wastebasket. You know, this has been a hard time. We've now been 3 years with Donald Trump as president. But here's the thing. We boo, but I'll tell you, there are a lot of people out there who are afraid. They're afraid for their families. They're afraid for their neighbors. They're afraid for their friends. They're afraid. They're afraid for children locked in cages at our borders. They are afraid for children on lockdown in our public schools. They are afraid for women. They are afraid for people of color. They are afraid for LGBTQ people. They are afraid for immigrants, all of whose rights will be up for grabs in this United States Supreme Court. They are afraid for our country, and they are afraid for the survival of our planet. And here's the thing. The danger is real. The danger is real. Our democracy, our world hangs in the balance in the 2020 election. So when there's that much danger out there, you got a choice, Texas. You can back up, you can get timid, you can kind of pull in your elbows, or you can fight back. Me, I'm fighting back. I'm fighting back. I'm fighting back. I'm fighting back. Fighting back is an act of patriotism. Think of it this way. We fought back against a king to build this country. We fought back against the scourge of slavery to preserve this union. We fought back against a Great Depression to rebuild this economy. We fought back against the rise of fascism to protect our democracy. Americans are at our best when we see a problem, we call it out, and we fight back. So I'm ready for this fight. You know, I don't have a campaign that was put together by a bunch of consultants. You probably figured that out. I don't have a campaign that has a bunch of carefully crafted proposals designed not to offend big donors. I passed that stop sign a long, long time ago. But I do have a campaign based on a lifetime of fighting for working families. I have a campaign from the heart because I believe in you. And I believe in the America
that we can build together. An America where every single person has value. An America where every single child is worth investing in. An America where we have a democracy where people, not money, is a most important part. An America of our best values. And if you believe that America is possible, if you can catch just a glimpse of what that America might be like, and you think that America is worth fighting for, then I'm asking you, get in this fight. 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 Because this is the moment in history that we have been called to. This moment in history will not come our way again. This is our moment in history to dream big, fight hard, and win.
Okay, thank you, Senator Warren! Woo! Okay, and we're gonna be doing selfies with.
We were playing a really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted. This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back.
Hello? Hey, brother!
How you doing?
After my brothers went off to the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack. My mom took a minimum wage job to save our house. Now, my parents didn't like to talk about our family's financial problems. I was the opposite. I wanted to pick at it, study it, try to understand it, and do everything I could to make sure it never happened to my family again. I spent years studying and listening to working families like mine. And I discovered a disturbing trend. More and more families were going bankrupt. Families like mine were falling further and further behind. And the crisis was hitting families of color even harder. And it was because Washington was listening more and more to big corporations. I started ringing alarm bells.
The idea that we have a strong economy is just false.
And then,
Now it's official, we are in a recession.
that's when I left the classroom and got in the fight.
Somebody has got to stand up on behalf of middle-class families.
Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren is heading into the lion's den.
She's become perhaps the leading voice in our country on behalf of consumers.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable. And when Republicans tried to sabotage reform, I ran against one of them, and I beat him. This election is about power. Who has too much of it, and who needs more of it? My daddy was a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, a senator, and a candidate for President of the United States. I have lived opportunity. And I believe that no matter where you live in America and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity. We can take on the rich and powerful to make our government work for all of us. And I'm not afraid to fight for it. That's why I'm running for president.